It all started so normal, you know? I never thought my trip would end up like this. My name's Emily, and I was flying back home to New York after spending a week in Canada visiting my older brother, Adam. We hadn't seen each other in years. Life just gets in the way, you know? Between my exhausting job in New York and his busy life in Toronto, we just lost touch. But when he called me out of the blue and told me he was engaged, I knew I had to go see him. I booked my ticket right away. The trip was amazing. We spent hours reminiscing about our childhood, watching old home videos, and laughing about dumb inside jokes. His fiancée, Sarah, was so sweet too. I felt like I was reconnecting with a part of myself I'd forgotten about. But eventually, reality called. My vacation time was up, and I had to head back to work. That morning, I packed my suitcase in his guest room. My clothes were wrinkled, souvenirs from little shops in Toronto stuffed awkwardly between my shoes. I double-checked that I had my passport and boarding pass, then zipped it up. I felt this weird pang of sadness. It was hard leaving, like I'd just gotten comfortable again, and now I had to go back to my little, lonely apartment. Adam drove me to the airport. He was playing some old rock station in the car, singing along to songs we used to listen to as kids. When we pulled up at the drop-off, he gave me a huge bear hug, like he didn't want to let go. "Don't forget about us little people when you're back in the big city," he joked, and I laughed even though my chest felt tight. Took a deep breath and headed inside. The smell of coffee and freshly baked pastries wafted through the air, mingling with the chatter of travelers. I felt a sense of normalcy there, surrounded by people embarking on their own journeys. Inside the airport, everything was the same as it always is, loud, chaotic, and overwhelming. I got through security quickly. After checking in, I was killing time like everyone else, scrolling through my phone, sipping on some overpriced coffee, just waiting for boarding to start. That's when I met him. He was sitting a few seats away, this tall, good-looking guy with dark, messy hair and this effortless confidence. He looked like he belonged in some glossy fashion ad, not in this dingy airport terminal. I glanced at him for a second too long, and he caught me. He smiled this warm, easy smile, and walked over like we were old friends. "Heading to New York too?" he asked, his voice smooth and casual. I nodded, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "Yeah," I said, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. We started talking. His name was Jake, and he told me he was a photographer who traveled a lot for work. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. I don't usually talk to strangers much, but there was something about him that made me feel comfortable. When he suggested grabbing a drink at the airport bar, I didn't think twice. It felt harmless. We sat at this small corner table, the bar dimly lit with a low hum of people chatting and clinking glasses. He ordered whiskey. I got a gin and tonic. He insisted on paying, said it was on him. We talked about everything, his work, my trip to see my brother, life in New York. He was funny and charming. The kind of guy who laughs at all the right moments and makes you feel like you're the most interesting person in the world. When they announced boarding, I felt a little disappointed. It was fun talking to him, and I figured that would be the end of it. But when I found my seat on the plane, I couldn't believe it. He was sitting right next to me. "What are the odds, huh?" he said, flashing that perfect smile. I felt a rush of excitement. Maybe this trip was going to be more fun than I had anticipated. I laughed nervously. "Yeah, really weird." The flight took off, and for the first hour, everything was fine. We talked a bit more, mostly about New York. He told me about his favorite spots for photography, asked me about my job. I work in marketing, nothing glamorous, but he made it sound fascinating. But then, after takeoff, everything changed. I closed my eyes, letting the hum of the engine soothe me into a light sleep. I was exhausted, the drinks and the long day finally taking their toll. But sleep didn't last long. I jolted awake, a cold sweat running down my back. Jake was too close. His hand was creeping up my thigh, fingers brushing in a way that sent chills down my spine. "Jake, what are you doing?" I gasped, my heart racing. I shot up in my seat, panic flooding my senses. The cabin lights were dim, and the low hum of the airplane felt surreal. It took me a moment to gather my thoughts, to realize what was happening. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he stammered, pulling his hand back as if caught in the act. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean to." His voice trailed off, but the charming facade was fading fast. There was something in his eyes, a darkness that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't want to be rude, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "Just don't touch me again," I whispered, my voice trembling. I stared at him, searching for any hint of remorse, but all I found was a mix of surprise and annoyance. The flight continued, the cabin filled with the sounds of murmurs and the occasional clink of glasses. I tried to focus on my breathing, to calm the rising tide of anxiety. I glanced at Jake, who now seemed more on edge. His charming demeanor had twisted into something unsettling, and I could feel the tension in the air. As minutes ticked by, I watched as he reached for his drink, taking a long swig while eyeing me. It was then that I noticed a slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted around as if searching for something. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Was he on something? The thought sent a wave of nausea washing over me. Suddenly, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. My vision blurred, and I realized that I couldn't focus. Panic set in, and I tried to shake my head to clear it. What's happening to me? I thought. The world around me spun, and I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I looked at Jake, who was now smiling, but it felt wrong, like a predator watching its prey. "Are you okay?" he asked, feigning concern, but there was no warmth in his voice. Instead, I sensed a looming threat. "You look a bit pale." I wanted to scream, to run, but my body felt heavy. It was then that I remembered our drinks. Had he done something to mine? The thought sent cold fear coursing through my veins. I forced myself to stay alert, to fight against the fog clouding my mind. "Excuse me, I need to use the restroom," I said, trying to sound normal. I stood up, feeling unsteady, and made my way down the aisle. The cabin was dark, the small lights flickering above each seat, casting eerie shadows. My heart raced as I reached the restroom, locking the door behind me. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to steady my breathing. My reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed and terrified. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but the dread continued to build. What had he done to me? As I opened the door to leave, I felt a sudden wave of dizziness again. I stumbled, catching myself against the wall. When I stepped back into the aisle, Jake was waiting for me. "There you are." "I was worried," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. But I couldn't trust him. Something deep within me screamed for me to get away. I decided to move toward the back of the plane, searching for a flight attendant. As I walked, I glanced back at Jake, only to find him watching me with a predatory gleam in his eyes. I hurried past the rows of seats, my heart pounding. Finally, I spotted a flight attendant. "Excuse me, can I talk to you?" I gasped, my voice shaky. She looked concerned as I explained my situation, my words tumbling out in a rush. Before I knew it, 2 flight attendants were leading me away from Jake, their expression serious. "We need to speak to him," one of them said, her voice firm but kind. I felt a mix of relief and fear as they approached him. Jake's demeanor changed completely. He stood up, a mask of innocence plastered on his face. "What's going on?" he asked, eyes darting between me and the attendants. As they began to question him, I felt a wave of adrenaline surge through me. I could see the tension building. The fear that had gripped me was now palpable in the air. It was then that I noticed a small bag peeking out of his jacket pocket. My heart sank as I realized what it was. "Drugs," I blurted out, recalling the way he had been acting. The flight attendants exchanged glances, and I could see the concern in their eyes. They called for security, and the weight of the situation crashed down on me like a tidal wave. Jake's charming facade shattered as the reality of his actions came to light. He was no longer the handsome stranger I had met at the bar. Instead, he was a predator caught in the act. My heart raced as I watched security escort him away, his face twisted in anger and disbelief. As the plane continued its journey, I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. I was safe, but the memory of those moments would haunt me forever. The thought of what could have happened if I hadn't woken up filled me with dread. Even after landing, as I walked through the terminal, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The world felt different, and the shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. I had escaped, but the encounter left a mark on my soul. Now, as I sit here writing this, I can't help but wonder about the nature of trust, how easily it can be shattered, how quickly a friendly face can turn sinister. I'm home, but the memories haunt me like a shadow, reminding me that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places. I'll never forget that flight, the moment my joy turned into sheer terror. The world may seem safe, but there are moments that remind us how fragile that safety can be. So next time you board a plane, remember, not everyone who smiles is a friend.